Okay, so it is, we're on schedule. Despite spending half an hour moving, we are on schedule with speaker workshops. So our next speaker, I think you've done this every year. I think you've been a speaker at the speaker workshop for many, many years, for the last, what, three years in a row? And one thing that I know about Mike is that he gives fantastic hands-on and very tangible presentations. So, Mike, you used to be at, we know you used to be at Mobile Iron, and now you are a senior researcher at ZeroFox. So, without much ado, so give it up for Mike Raggo.
Thanks, everybody. You guys hear me okay? Good? Yeah? Okay. So my name is Mike Raggo. I do work at ZeroFox, and coincidentally, a couple of our other team members are actually presenting downstairs at the DEF CON conference on weaponizing social media. So we're all presenting at the same time here. My presentation is going to focus on attacks on enterprise social media. We found that as we work more and more with organizations and take a look at the threat landscape, that it's quite a big blind spot for a lot of organizations. So my goal here is to hopefully shed some more light on that, define a possible methodology that you can encompass in your organization using kind of a Dan Farmer type of approach. Any old school people here who know who Dan Farmer is? All right, cool. So I won't quote Dan, but essentially the methodology he came up with, I would say around 94 or 95, was to really take an approach of hacking your network to get a better understanding on how to fortify it. And so I'm going to take the same strategy here in the context of social media. So we'll cover the social media threat landscape, help classify certain categorizations, build out a taxonomy. We'll go through an anatomy of a social media attack on a corporate enterprise network and kind of take a look at a lot of the mechanisms that could be used to penetrate a corporate network actually using social media. Furthermore, we'll get into reviewing the old school methodology of reconnaissance and attack, encompassing footprinting, monitoring, profile, impersonations, attacks, things in the context of social media that you're probably all familiar with in terms of doing network pen testing. And then I'll cover some of the other topical things we're seeing as of late, and then wrap up with a number of countermeasures for you. Just real briefly, my background, I got into security around the mid-90s. I was working at the NASDAQ stock market, downloaded Dan Farmer's Satan tool, ran it on the trading floor, and accidentally took down the stock market. So thought I was going to be fired, got a promotion out of it to help run the security group and better fortify the NASDAQ network, and so I've been in security ever since. My background is I do speak at a lot of shows. Shouts out to HackCon this year in Oslo, Norway. Great conference, all the money gets donated to charity, great cause. My background encompasses a number of different things. Previously, I was doing a lot of mobile and smartwatch ethical hacking, and last year did a demo lab downstairs on how to hack into the Samsung smartwatch. And for a long time, been doing a lot of research with my good friend Chet Hosmer around steganography, covert communications, and data hiding. And we authored a book on data hiding. Tomorrow morning, we'll be doing a presentation in Sky Talks at 9 a.m. on what's lurking in an MP3 that can hurt you. So we're going to break down the new ID3 headers that are in the latest MP3 standard, get into a lot of the ones that are even undocumented and how you can exploit that, how you can hide data, how you can hide malicious URLs, command and control information, and even use some steganographic approaches to album covers that you embed within the MP3s. So check that out if that's something that you're into. Oh, and they wanted me to mention that the mobile data loss book that just came out, we'll be doing a book signing downstairs at 3:30. All right, so let's get into the content. So We're all familiar with social media. We all understand the privacy concerns around it and how that's kind of blurred really, how we operate in our personal lives and what that overlap may or may not be in the context of an organization you may actually work for. But with that introduces a whole new threat landscape, a threat landscape that's enumerated a lot of different new methods of attack that can be exploited leveraging social media. So if we take a look at a lot of the attacks that are going on beyond a number of executives at a lot of high-end corporations that have had their Twitter accounts and other accounts hacked over the last few months, we see a lot of organizations being targeted using a number of different methods. And in terms of profiling those organizations, they not only look at the company and the company name and accounts that they own, but sub-brands, subsidiaries, dormant accounts, and a lot of other things that really make up your corporate social media footprint. Furthermore, beyond a lot of the things we see in mapping out a lot of those social media accounts related to an organization, with executives and even employees being an extension of that, we furthermore see a variety of impersonation attacks whereby they leverage the picture, they leverage the bio, they leverage a number of different things to make it look like a legitimate account. And we'll talk about building a level of trust and how an attacker leveraged that to further perform some of the attacks we'll get into later on in the presentation. But we've got the normal culprits, right? Want to perform scams, execute cyber attacks, even in many cases stage violence. There's a lot of analysis going on today from a number of organizations around the Olympics and the potential for violence. As a baseline here, if we take a look at the anatomy of a social media malicious link attack, there's a number of steps that can lead up to this. And we'll compare and contrast this to like old school methodologies of network pen testing, and as I mentioned, then correlate that to social media. But when an individual seeks to go ahead and create an impersonation account, there are a lot of different tactics. Maybe the end goal is to connect with a variety of employees, executives, other people in the organization, maybe even contractors or business partners, to provide some type of malicious link that leads to malware or some type of exploit. We'll go through some examples of that, as well as phishing. And then in addition to that, leverage that capability of connecting with a variety of individuals, getting people to follow that individual, and then leveraging that to execute some kind of beachhead into the network. So I think we're all intimately familiar with this, right? When we go through a process from a traditional network pen testing perspective of footprinting the network, doing scanning, port scans, ping sweeps, using Nmap, a variety of other tools. And then furthermore, getting into enumerating more and more about the network. And as you start to think about this in the context of social media, what are those things that map directly to this, and what are things that are clearly very, very different? But a key differentiation here is when we take a look at our perimeter and endpoint security today, fairly early in the cycle can we identify the emerging attack or indicators of attack. And so as a result, we've got different mechanisms to identify those threats. But if we take a look at it in a social media context, we take a look at all the steps leading up to reconnaissance and how people can now go out there and footprint, monitor, and profile individuals in social, it's obvious that this is occurring outside of your network. So you don't get those early warning signs when a lot of this activity is happening. And as a result, when that malware, when that malicious link, when that phishing link hits one of those individuals, maybe at the point where you detect it, or it may not. And furthermore, if they're sending it via a direct message or something else, none of that has touched your enterprise network if they're not sitting on the network. And most likely they're more off the network than they are on the network. So it's all about building a level of trust. So when the attacker goes ahead and profiles and leverages a lot of the hashtags and the other things we'll outline on the next slide, allows them to go ahead and engage with all the people that they're looking to obtain as followers or have connections with across all the social network platforms, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Pinterest, so on and so forth. So applying this methodology in a social media context, if we take a look at all the different social media networks, we have some examples here between LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Google+. There's certainly a lot of stuff you can publicly enumerate across these accounts. On LinkedIn, obviously a little bit more of a professional platform, and so you can really get a good map of all the employees that work for the organization, where they're located, titles, and additional connections that they have. And so as you start to footprint this, you can very quickly map out a whole plethora of people that work for the company. Cross-correlating that then to, say, for example, Twitter. Across Twitter, people will have bios, they'll have links, they'll have information around their hobbies, similar thing on Facebook. And so as you start to profile these individuals, there's really, of course, a plethora of information that you can compile. And then lastly, on Google+, you may be able to get some additional information that you aren't able to get across some of the other platforms. So compiling all of this allows you to build this massive reconnaissance level type of footprint that you can use in the next steps. As you start to get into monitoring and profiling, as these individuals are identified within the organization or the company brand that's being managed by the marketing people, you can actually start to get a commonality in terms of hashtags that they like to use, keywords, people who used to be employees of the company that still follow, and leverage that to, again, continue to just create this massive database of information. And that's exactly what we do in terms of trying to determine, when there might be a bad actor emerging. Furthermore, as they further engage with folks, they may leverage @mentions and using hashtags and other keywords that they're familiar with. And again, very easily getting executives and other folks to follow or connect with them. So as we take a look here at sort of this bullseye, right, we're kind of drilling deeper and deeper into all of these levels of analysis. So here's an example here. Zenprise was a company that did MDM. They were later acquired by Citrix. And if you take a look at the followers and the activity on this account, it's very much dormant, right? And so who's really monitoring that account? And might there be low-hanging fruit or the ability to kind of take a look at, posts that are on here to perhaps guess the password? And in fact, some of these accounts we'll talk about later on with the exposure of some of these. Furthermore, some of these you can try to do a password reset but not execute it, and it might give you a partial on the email address as well. Joe talked about that a little bit in his last presentation. And then with the tweets, you can see here, this guy retweeted a guy that used to work there, and we see some other hashtags and other mentions here. So our team leverages a lot of, we have 2 data scientists with their PhDs, a lot smarter than me, and those are the guys that are presenting downstairs. But leveraging some machine learning, we can also track and monitor these potential bad actors to see if a lot of the activity that they're doing is related to one or more impersonation accounts. Was the first follower or first connection on this new impersonator account another account that they own? And by trying to build credibility, they go ahead and create a number of followers and connections to legitimize what it is they're possibly trying to do. So in the context of impersonations, what we've seen across, on average, 100 enterprises is that there's about 1,000 impersonation accounts created per week, or roughly 10 per organization. And magnify that or multiply that times the number of weeks in a year, and you can see that there's quite a lot of impersonation accounts targeting your average enterprise organization. When they go ahead and create these accounts, certainly they want to make it look very legit. We do a lot of analysis in terms of the images that are used on there. Did they just right-click and download the image from another profile on the same social network or a different one and then upload it here? Or did they do Photoshop or cropping and things like that? can be fairly sophisticated to identify those techniques, but it is quite doable. And then in addition, they, again, want to create a legitimate account, right? So they're going to go ahead and create that same bio or very, very similar. But as you can see here for the Warren Buffett account, it's a slight misspelling. But other than that, from a quick glance, it looks fairly legit. And as we monitored this account and many others, we can see lots of people following, tweeting on here, and lots of, app mentions and things like that. And they use this to pretty much further their campaign. Are the followers potentially other employees of the organization? Maybe then they can follow them back and create additional connections with them on other social networks such as LinkedIn and others. Hey, I connected with you on Twitter. Thought you might want to connect on LinkedIn. I'll see you at the office next week. It'd be really nice to meet up. And so a lot of this engagement further allows them to create credibility and build that level of trust. So we've seen a lot of accounts hijacked over the last few months, especially some high-profile executives at some really big internet firms. And one of those, of course, was MySpace with millions of accounts, maybe old dormant accounts, maybe accounts that were initially held in a database since 2012 or even older than that. But what's kind of interesting about this is we know people have a tendency to use the same password amongst or across a lot of their accounts. We also know that if we can further enumerate their email address, we might be able to target their email account and leverage that as an attack method to target another social media account that they might have. So on the next slide, we'll show you kind of some locations where you can go and look up some of those passwords. So as we dig deep into social web and other things, there are things like Pastebin where a lot of this stuff will get posted out there. And if we've already got some profile of some of the bad actors or some of these impersonating accounts, we can use some of the tactics that we mentioned, such as a partial email address and some of the other things that we mentioned, to go out here and look across some of the other social web to see if we can find some of these other accounts. Has anybody used Troy Hunt's website? Have I been pwned? So Troy doesn't actually post the passwords, but he'll go out there and post, the lists of accounts that have been potentially exposed as a lot of these breaches, like the MySpace one and the others. And this allows you as an organization or an individual to go out there and say, oh crap, was my name on the list? Do I need to go out there and reset my password? If I'm in the enterprise, is this something I need to incorporate into my incident response policy and track on an ongoing basis to say, hey, Mr. Executive, your account was exposed. We found it on this list. Whether or not you've changed your password since 2012, we're going to ask you to go ahead and change your password now. It would be a really good idea. So coming back to what we referenced a few times in terms of establishing trust. Without connections, without followers, without friends, the attacker's attack surface can be quite limited. And so making all of these connections, making all of these followers is key to their overall campaign. Another thing that, of course, is quite common to social media is shortened URLs, right? There's a variety of shortened URLs. They vary across the different social networks and independent of that. And we know that attackers will leverage that because it further obfuscates a malicious URL that they may be tweeting, that they may be posting, that they may be sending via a direct message. So in doing analysis of a lot of these URL shorteners, there's a lot of them out there. You've got Bitly, you've got Google, Hootsuite, TinyURL, TinyCC. There's a bunch of them out there. When we did our analysis, we also took a look at, well, to what extent are they providing protection? In other words, if I, receive a message or somebody tweets and tags me in a particular post, and that includes a malicious URL, have they done any vetting of that URL before it was posted to identify that it was bad? In many cases, the answer is no. Most of the time, they don't. There's a couple on this list that actually do, but there's quite a lot more that don't. So we'll kind of see, and we've kind of spoken about this at a few other conferences, we'll see if they take this advice and further provide a way to protect us all in terms of how they do the URL shortening and how they pre-screen these URLs before they shorten them. Here's just one of a gazillion examples. Here we've got a bit.ly one, and when we actually take a look at the destination URL and then the analysis we did in terms of what it did allowed us to determine that, hey, this is a malicious URL. But this was post-mortem, right? This tweet was out there, other people clicked on it, and it was really after the fact. So, you've got your normal culprits: malware, phishing link, malicious browser plugin. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, or even bad apps in the context of social media. So this Cowboy app was provided via a link and would prompt users to download the app, and upon installing the app would pop up a Facebook login and harvest Facebook credentials from unknowing users that installed the app. And so it's just one of a numerous number of examples in which we see this being leveraged across social media. Our team also did a lot of analysis around scams, and the really smart guys downstairs presenting the weaponizing talk leveraged their expertise combined with the rest of our team's expertise from a forensic standpoint to say, how do we profile a lot of these scams? There's numerous scams out there. Who's seen the Ray-Ban one, right? It's just all over Facebook, right? I see it every day, and a couple times a week I get friends that reach out to me, hey, you work in social media cybersecurity, is this Ray-Ban link, malicious, or is it good? So there's certainly a lot of context that we collect, around a lot of these malicious posts. In addition, the Ray-Ban one, for example, was encouraging people to purchase Ray-Bans at a 90% discount, and the money would go to charity. So it was clearly a scam. People would click on it. It might hijack their Facebook account and or allow them to go out and make a purchase of sunglasses that they will ultimately never receive. And so would therefore steal their credit card information too. These are still very, very rampant on Facebook. I'm still seeing these every day. And if we take a look how far this goes back, it goes back to at least 2014, and it looks like in some cases maybe as far back as 2012. So, kind of what I've discussed already. Here's an example that we took from Facebook. I took this one was provided to me actually by one of my friends. We did some analysis on it as well, just to understand a little bit more about what it was doing. But if we take a closer look at the metadata, we can see here there's a lot of additional information here that's kind of under the cover of the actual post, or what they were sending directly to an individual. And as you can see here, as we expand the URL, it goes out to this random address to infect the device. Now, a lot of those URLs, if you're looking to fortify your enterprise network or your endpoint security with a list of these, not only malicious URLs, but malicious domains, there is a published list for this. And we also leverage some third-party products, too, that help us map those out and identify even more than we do organically with what we do internally. So if you're looking to say, well, how do I protect my users against these malicious URLs, against these phishing links, against these types of attacks, you can actually leverage these lists along with others that get mapped out in terms of identifying these and feed these into your firewall, your IDS, malware protection system, your endpoint security, and so forth. We also saw this Facebook malware click fraud. And with this one, which also happened recently, as it says here, this would be sent out to a particular user's friend. It would pop up and say, hey, I need to verify your age. It would go ahead and leverage the ability to install a Chrome extension, which by the way was in the Chrome extension store but later removed, and by doing so would allow them to go ahead and attack the individual. You get a malicious payload, and then it would harvest their Facebook credentials. But Google did a good job. They went ahead and removed the Chrome extension from the store while also removing it from the 132,000, apparently, users that were infected by this. And as a result, we always recommend from time to time to take a look at your extensions that you might have specifically within Chrome and remove any unnecessary extensions. And then one other one, which happened a few weeks prior to that, which again was a link. It would encourage people to go ahead and like it, and it also included malware and would infect specifically Windows PCs running Chrome. So we've kind of outlined a number of steps leading to a variety of threats, risks, and even possible attacks within your organization. As you can see here, what we talked about earlier, there's a lot of things going on here in terms of footprinting, monitoring, and profiling individuals, making those connections, building a social media group of trust by which they can leverage to attack specific individuals or an organization. There was documented a really big high-profile case in which social media was leveraged to penetrate a particular enterprise network and leverage that capability to circumvent email, malware, and phishing link detections and actually infiltrate the network with hardly even touching it at all through a particular user's device that wasn't on the network at the time and bringing that into the environment like we've seen in other cases, but in the context here with social media. So if we take a look here, kind of like the steps leading up to attack, what things can you do to possibly detect these threats earlier in the life cycle rather than at the point of attack or the point of infection? So a lot of mechanisms and some tips and suggestions we provided as well to help you identify characteristics of impersonators, to identify when people are connecting perhaps with people they shouldn't. And furthermore, doing discovery efforts to determine, well, what is my corporate or enterprise or organizational social media footprint? Where are all the accounts that I should be concerned about? Did we acquire a number of subsidiaries? Did those particular marketing people create social media accounts that are long dormant but connected with our own accounts and kind of considered trusted, such that if that account was hijacked and then they sent a direct message or a connection that may already exist with one of the enterprise network enterprise accounts, could they leverage sending that a direct message to commit some type of exploit? And then in addition to that, if they send some type of malicious link, URL, malware, bad app, etc., what mechanisms do you have that in place to detect whether or not that would be detected from a social media standpoint? How does it penetrate the network? We kind of outlined a few examples of that, but essentially, if they're going to be sending that through a direct message rather than email, certainly makes it a little bit more difficult to identify that threat. So if you're leveraging some of the other context and data we mentioned to backfill what you're doing from an endpoint security standpoint, might allow you better mechanisms for identifying those early warning signs before that device gets infected or that infected device further impacts your network. So some additional countermeasures. As I mentioned, you want to identify your corporate network social media footprint. So identify all the brand accounts, all the company accounts, all the dormant accounts left over from subsidiaries that were acquired a long time ago, marketing people that have long left the organization, all your executives, and change out in some of those executives. They're going to connect with a lot of people that look legitimate that really are imposters. So you really want to leverage that capability to identify that behavior on an ongoing basis. In addition, probably goes without saying, there's a level of two-factor authentication, arguably, with a lot of the social networks today. Definitely want to encompass that within your security policy and encourage your executives, the brand accounts, the company accounts, to all have that enabled as another mechanism to protect against some type of hijacking. pretty much in all the examples of the hijacking we've seen with some high-profile executives over the last couple months, not only did they have weak passwords, but they didn't have two-factor authentication enabled for their accounts. And with all the intelligence and a lot of the things we outlined earlier, is there a way to take that data and consume it, not only in your firewall or your IDS or your MPS or the other web proxy and other perimeter security that you might have or endpoint security, but can you leverage it from the perspective of a SIM? Splunk is here, right? You know, there's a lot of different ways in which you can consume that data and use it in a really good way for cross-correlating with the rest of your security events. And now might be a good time to augment or enhance your incident response policy to encompass social media, and perhaps some of the things I've outlined today will help you kind of outline some of that and figure out, hey, you know, to what extent are we going to respond to certain types of threats? Not only identify it, but what is our response plan going to be? And is that going to be iterative over time since social media is changing so quickly today? And that's it. So open it up for questions if anybody has any questions. I think we have a couple minutes before the next presenter. Go ahead.
So have you seen any attacks against monitoring and publishing solutions from third parties to steal API tokens so that they could get aggregate tokens to be able to post on behalf of those employers?
It's a good question. Yeah. Yep. I'll see if I can kind of paraphrase or rephrase it, and if I get it wrong, let me know. But it was essentially around the tokens that are used behind the scenes with the social media accounts, and effectively have we seen both like mechanisms in which people are either harvesting, stealing, and thus reusing those to commit attacks? And the short answer is yes. We're kind of monitoring a couple really important scenarios now that I can't get into like too much detail, but the short answer is yes, and therefore, you know, and I think this is probably your key point, and I'm glad you brought it up, you know, is behind the scenes there is this token that, you know, coexists as a result of having your account. So if you have that stashed anywhere, or if you know what that is, you certainly want to protect that, right? Because somebody could basically impersonate you. So, great question, thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead. Yeah, a little bit to an extent without getting into too much secret sauce, sure. So in terms of the impersonators, they're, you know, we kind of have two groups of people in our organization, right? We've got your traditional threat researchers and people with like a forensics background, which is more me, and then we've got a bunch of data scientists with their PhDs with a lot of experience in math and machine learning. And those are the guys that are presenting downstairs right now. But in the context of impersonators, we kind of take a combination of both of those approaches. And one of the things that the guys downstairs are covering is, you know, the tool that they created is sort of a proof of concept to show that how they could basically impersonate somebody and then leverage that capability to weaponize a phishing tool, allowed them with a combination of machine learning and seeing how people perform various types of tweets and hashtags and keywords and things that build that trust that we talked about a few times in this presentation to send out additional tweets and build that web of trust. But in the terms of like identifying impersonators themselves, there's some analysis we do in terms of the metadata. There's a lot of cross-correlation across the social networks. So little nuggets of data across, especially some unique social networks, that allow us to compile a huge list of data around a specific impersonator. And so it may be metadata that exists on some social networks that don't exist on others. So here's an example. You know, if you go out there and you find an image that's been posted, a lot of these social networks will go ahead and remove a lot of that metadata, supposedly to protect the privacy of the individuals that own that account or that are posting that picture. But if you find that same picture, and there are ways to identify it, you can go out there and look on the social networks that don't actually remove that metadata, pull that down, and leverage that data that is within that picture, such as location information, such as the device information, and a variety of other metadata that you normally see within an image that's been taken from an actual mobile device and then posted on the web. So there's a whole bunch of different techniques that you can leverage for that. Great question. Any other questions? Sounds great. Well, thanks everyone for the time today. Hope you enjoyed it.